Welcome to the Drift and Ramble Podcast. I'm Steve Blizin. Each episode will explore true stories and American legends. From the pages of history and a few stories handed down over the years, we'll look at the people, places, and events that helped shape a nation. Stories of survival, notable frontier men and women, explorers who struck it rich, and the outlaws that stole it from them. There'll be studies of saloon girls, swindlers, banditry, and bad men, profiles of lawmen and American Indians, and the good and evil that existed between them. We'll amble through the past, we'll delve into the folklore of the times, and maybe even uncover a ghost story or two. So, saddle up, or settle in, for the Drift and Ramble Podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 3. When we think of the old days of the American West, it's images of cowboys and Indians that come to mind. But the influence of kings and queens was a major part of the West. In fact, if you trace with your finger back through time to the origins of California, you'll find that the state we now know was named for the mythical Queen Calafia, ruler of the island of California, from a book dating back all the way to the 1500s. Despite being home to more than 100 Native American tribes, the territory was considered to be under the control of Spanish royalty, such as King Charles IV, Ferdinand VII, and even the French, as Mexico fought to free itself from the grasp of its oppressors. So the story we're about to reveal is all about kings and cowboys, vaqueros and Native American Indians, sheepherders, jilted lovers, an evil stepfather, a greedy land baron, a grisly death, and ghostly spirits. But how does it all fit together? The story begins with an immigrant Basque sheepherder who came to America at his father's request, quite possibly for bringing shame on the family name, presumably seeking refuge from prosecution by the French government for smuggling. In fact, most likely, the man was sent to America as a punishment. But you could say this is a story all about life, lemons, and the pursuit of lemonade, because this man would one day be known as a king here in America, no less, and it's a haunting tale. If it all sounds a bit like a Hollywood story, there's good reason. It all begins to take shape in Los Angeles, and a little lesser-known town called Calabasas. Sure, Calabasas may have been home to Justin Bieber and Kim Kardashian, and even the mythical Ray Donovan. But the tiny town with questionable residents has always seemed to be the backdrop for controversy. So how does a steely-eyed smuggler, sheepherder, and common-law husband become the third richest man in California? And who is this mysterious woman at the center of the story? And why is their property considered the most active paranormal site in Los Angeles County? On today's episode of the Drift and Ramble Podcast, it's all about Miguel Leonis, the king of Calabasas. Miguel Leonis was born to wealthy parents living in the Basque province of France, high up in the Pyrenees Mountains near the border of Spain. His father was a high-ranking government official with the French government. But young Miguel was an entrepreneur in his own right, from an early age. He set about to build a profitable business, smuggling contraband back and forth over the border. His wiry frame, steely gaze, and tall stature of 6 feet 4 inches only served to strengthen his naturally shrewd business acumen, and by the age of 20, he had earned quite a reputation and the attention of the law. At his father's insistence, and to protect the family name, he was sent as far away as possible, perhaps to avoid prosecution. So just where does a young smuggler go to begin life anew again? Why, Los Angeles, of course. But a Basque immigrant coming to Los Angeles was not that unusual at the time. In fact, according to Nancy Zaburi's book, A Travel Guide to Basque America, the Basques enjoyed a large immigrant community in the Los Angeles area, and it still exists here today. So it was here, in the valley, where young Miguel Leonis arrived in 1854 with barely more than the clothes on his back. The tall, handsome stranger, with the piercing eyes, went to work as a sheepherder at Rancho El Scorpion, where he grew a beard and sought to build his fortune. In both these efforts, he was very successful. As the Los Angeles Times reported years later, he arrived as an ignorant Basque sheepherder and blossomed into a robber baron holding feudal sway by the aid of a small army of vaqueros. In fact, young Miguel would one day become the third richest man in California. When the owner of Rancho El Scorpion took ill, Miguel Leonis seized the opportunity to purchase half of the ranch property. Leonis acquired the other half through marriage, a marriage he would later deny. Rancho El Scorpion was originally an 1,100-acre Mexican land grant given by Governor Pio Pico to 3 Chumash Indians, Chief Odon Eusebia, his son-in-law Urbano, and Urbano's son Manuel. Later, Chief Odon's daughter, Maria del Espiritu Santo Chihuya, became owner, and she married or lived with a man named Menendez, and they had a son named Juan Jose Menendez. What became of Espiritu's first husband is unknown, but the remaining Rancho El Scorpion property belonged to Espiritu Chihuya. In 1859, she meets and eventually begins living with Miguel Leonis, and they have a child together, a daughter named Marcelina. Though no formal marriage documents exist, she claims that they're married, while Leonis claims she's just his housekeeper. But Leonis winds up in control of the property. With the property, he acquired a small adobe that was once a stagecoach stop along the Camino Real between 2 missions. Miguel immediately goes to work improving and expanding the home until it begins to resemble the 2-story Monterey colonial-style mansion we can now visit today. The Leonis Adobe, as it would eventually be known, includes an expansive Queen Anne-style second-floor veranda and is one of the oldest surviving structures in the San Fernando Valley, dating back to the 1840s. This stately structure soon became the central point, or castle, from which Miguel Leonis would reign over his eventual kingdom. More from the Drift and Ramble podcast after this.
Have you ever walked into someone's home and thought, big box retail outlet decor? Rhiannon's Interiors offers affordable interior decorating and style services customized to each individual client. Whether you want a complete refresh or just add a little splash of style, it's Rhiannon to the rescue. Offering a myriad of color match and contrast options, Rhiannon's got the skills to bring your concept to fruition. Ask about complete design packages or a la art services if that's more your style. In fact, that's what Rhiannon's Interiors is all about. More your style. Check out her website for information, ideas, and inspiration at rhiannonsinteriors.com. Rhiannon's Interiors. Your style, your way, today. rhiannonsinteriors.com.
As Leonis builds his wealth, so too does he build his army, and he deploys these men, mostly Mexican vaqueros and Chumash Indian locals, to protect and defend his property and to intimidate other landowners. They chase off any squatters and coerce other landowners into selling or just losing claim to their property. His army of vaqueros build tiny shacks on any property where his sheep graze to invoke the California Homestead Act, while Leonis himself vigorously wages war for properties in court, even though he can barely utter a single word of English. In fact, so litigious is the aggressive, green-eyed former smuggler who would be king that record shows some 30 court cases here in Los Angeles courts. The man seems relentless in his pursuit of wealth and power. In 1875, as Civil War veterans move west, a group of former Union soldiers try to settle near the Leonis Adobe, and Miguel meets perhaps his toughest opponents. A ferocious and bloody battle ensues in what is now known as Hidden Hills, a gated and exclusive community. The battle raged for 2 weeks before the Civil War veterans were finally vanquished by the king's vaqueros. So vast were his holdings that his property was measured in miles, not acres, and at the time of his death, Miguel Leonis was said to have amassed approximately $1 million in value, a staggering number given the time and history. But despite the rise to riches that earns Miguel Leonis the nickname the King of Calabasas, Miguel cannot be a true king without a queen, and things at home are hardly happy. Miguel and Espiritu have a daughter named Marcelina, and Espiritu has a son named Juan from her previous marriage. Miguel is not kind to Juan, and in fact forbids him to even cross the threshold of the Adobe. Marcelina lives barely to adulthood and dies at age 20. If Leonis doesn't love Espiritu, and he treats her as a housekeeper and not as bride, imagine the tension building up inside this home. There must be a contentious relationship between the aggressive Basque king of Calabasas and the Chumash Indian girl, a chief's daughter, making her a sort of princess bride. The two have so little in common, and yet have a common law marriage, but a marriage apparently without love. Still, 30 years pass between them. It's now 1889. One evening, Miguel Leonis is returning home from court in Los Angeles, and he's been rumored to be indulgent with some sour wine. While making his way, working his wagon through the Cahuenga Pass, he somehow falls from the wagon and falls beneath its wheels, crushing his body with life-threatening injuries. Whether he dies at the scene or dies in his own bed remains a mystery. But what is clear is that in his will, he has no regard for Espiritu, his partner of some 30 years. He leaves his wife only $10,000, while the bulk of his estate goes to his brother in Los Angeles. Espiritu, poor and uneducated, trusts many of the wrong people to help her win her property back. Swindlers, confidence men, and schemers swarm in to take advantage, and so deeply entangle the already messy situation that there are over 100 lawsuits, and it takes 16 years to untangle the mess. Espiritu is stripped of every nickel and dime within her grasp, and at one point is said to survive only by eating the acorns that had fallen from the trees around her property. Eventually, she is victorious, and her case becomes California's first win of its kind for common law marriage, an important feat in and of itself. But Espiritu is not without some controversy herself. At 65 years of age, Espiritu remarries, and it causes quite a stir. Her young lover is just 18 years old. But whether it was the arduous journey through our legal system or the vigorous affections of her young groom, her victory is short-lived. Espiritu dies just months after the case was won. So where does all that tension go? What happens to those who die in the midst of battle? Do their tortured souls continue to fight? Is there no rest for the dead when life was such a struggle? Does this turmoil and suffering seep deep into the grain of the hardwood floors, spoiling the soil beneath the home? Or does it rise up and soak into the ceiling, sullying the structure itself for all eternity? Perhaps there is a lot of energy stored up within these walls. Spirits, some might say. Espiritu, others claim. And still others say they've seen a tall, thin shadow pass along the window. Could it be the long shadow cast by Miguel Leonis himself? Chichita, chichita. when the property passed to Espiritu's son, Juan. He lived there for 16 years, building a barn, working as a blacksmith, and making wine. He sold the property in 1922 to the Agora family, who then lost it in foreclosure. It became a chicken dinner restaurant, and then a retirement home, and eventually was owned by actor John Carradine. The property seemed to be in a constant state of flux. Was this because the original owners hadn't left? Were they still fighting in the foyer or pacing on the veranda? Are these two contentious spirits still fighting yet today? As the property changed hands, so too did the stories of strange happenings and odd occurrences. Things that move on their own. Footsteps heard when no one else could possibly have made them. And one story of the railing snapping in two as a young woman unknowingly leaned against it for support. When the rotted railing gave way, she should have fallen from the second floor. But instead, she reported the firm grasp of a steady hand, pulling her swiftly backwards to safety. So she turned to thank the stranger who had saved her. And no one was there. Espiritu's own granddaughter once heard a voice whisper, "Chichita, Chichita," her grandmother's pet name for her. But she knew, of course, that wasn't possible. Still, the stories of hauntings and strange happenings were so prevalent that soon this property became known as one of the most active paranormal sites in Southern California. Many believe that Miguel and Espiritu still roam the second floor of the Adobe frequently. When we asked to speak to the curator of the property, she politely declined an interview and vehemently insisted we not ask her or the staff about paranormal activities. So we did the next best thing and went to visit the property at night. The first thing a good ghost story needs is a spooky setting, and the setting of the Leonis Adobe is anything but frightening. In fact, the property is sliced down the middle by a busy thoroughfare, which even on weeknights is a busily traveled section of road. It's difficult to imagine being scared with cars blasting loud music darting by. The neighboring business is the Sagebrush Cantina, and this Western-themed saloon-style venue offers Mexican fare, live music, and libations, a popular destination for locals. To say the place is lively is an understatement. Second, the Adobe is set back from the road but bordered by the 101 freeway behind it. With 8 lanes of traffic flowing by just feet behind and 2 lanes of busy surface street traffic in the front, the serene setting this regal property once enjoyed is all but forgotten today. A good ghost story needs witnesses, and here at the Adobe, we couldn't find a single one. Docents are instructed not to talk about such things, while visitors and workers at nearby locations that we spoke to had nothing to relate when we asked if ghostly experiences had happened to them. One parking attendant who works the lot directly in front of the old mansion told us, "I've worked here for 2 years until 2 in the morning on many nights, and I've never heard of any ghosts." The property is surrounded by security cameras, high fences, and even has livestock on the premises. Gaining access to the property after hours simply isn't possible, and with the rowdy crowds and freeway sounds as constant sonic reminders of the current time in which we live, it would be impossible to hear any echoes of the past, regardless of how loud they were. I suspect they're only whispers. Still, the Leonis Adobe is a worthwhile trip for the whole family. Kids will love all the animals at hand: sheep, goats, horses, even longhorn cattle. We saw chickens, roosters, guinea hens, and even turkeys. And there's even a cat or two roaming around to greet guests. We learned about the lifestyle of Miguel Leonis and his Chumash common-law bride, and we toured the house and property, making for an enjoyable trip back in time, despite the modern rush all around us. Ghostly spirits may have proved elusive for this episode of the Drift and Ramble podcast, but in our next installment, we'll visit one of California's true ghost towns, and there could be thrills and chills along the way. Stay tuned for our trip to Bodie, a ghost town in the eastern Sierras of California, on the next Drift and Ramble podcast. Now, here's a word from our sponsors.
Well, daggone, Missy. I done come all the way from Tulsa just to see you, and there ain't no daggone place for me to hang my hat in this here cabin.
Oh, pshaw, dude. You know it ain't polite to greet a lady by complaining. Now go sit yourself down in one of them barrels I've been using for chairs and rest your feet on this old crate.
Now, Missy, I reckon you got yourself a budget to work with, but I'm here to tell you this place needs help in a bad way.
Well, dude, I guess you do have a point there. Maybe you ought to leave your hat on to keep it covered. Honestly, I want to fix this place up, but I need help from one of them fancy interior decorators. I probably can't afford that based on this measly chicken scratch you call a paycheck.
Dang it, Missy, you sure know how to make a man feel special. Why don't you check out Rhiannon's Interiors? They got him a newfangled website and all kinds of ideas. It's rhiannonsinteriors.com. High class without the high price tag.
Now, dude, you ain't going soft on me, are ya? A girl might wonder how a man knows about such things.
Aw, shucks, Missy, it ain't nothing. I only found out about it when Injun Jim said Rhiannon just redone his wigwam. Place looks nice. I didn't have to sit on no barrel neither. Rhiannon's Interiors. They do good work. Whether you make your home on the range or in the big city, Rhiannon's Interiors has your style in mind.
You can visit the Leonis Adobe too. Details can be found at leonisadobemuseum.org. And of course, the Sagebrush Cantina is right next door. Whether you're a local or a traveler in search of a taste of the Old West, you'll find it here at the Leonis Adobe. Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizzen. See you at the next installment of the Drift and Ramble podcast.
The Drift and Ramble podcast is a Clear Voice Media production, hosted and produced by Steve Blizzen, with segment research and voice acting by Cheryl Blizzen. Additional contributions and content have been made possible by support from individuals dedicated to the art and science of storytelling and exploring the still fertile promise of the American West.
The Drift and Ramble podcast is a Clear Voice Media production.